Hello, cruel, cruel world. Everybody and their grandma knows about the high-profile defamation lawsuit between Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. I'm a forensic psychiatrist and I'm an expert witness, so I've done hundreds of criminal and civil cases. So when I heard that both sides took on these expert witness, it piqued my interest. So Shannon Curry on behalf of Johnny Depp and Dawn Hughes on behalf of Amber Heard. And I've looked into the testimony and I have a lot of interesting things to say, a lot of criticism. So this video is basically my evaluation of the expert witnesses and how they acted, what their conclusions were, etc. So I'm going to give you an insight from the perspective of a professional expert witnesses. I'm going to answer the questions: do I think their diagnoses were accurate? Do I think they were fair? Were they neutral? Were there areas that I think were dodgy? Spoiler alert, yes. And what were those areas, including Shannon Curry having dinner and drinks at Johnny Depp's house with the actors' legal teams? So do I think that was reasonable? Do I think it was illegal? Do I think it was unfair? I'm going to answer all those questions and many, many more in this episode of A Psych for Sore Minds. My name is Dr. 𝐏𝐬𝐲𝐡. I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist. I assess mentally disordered offenders for a living so that you don't have to. You can call me the ominous 𝐏𝐬𝐲𝐡. Sit back, relax, grab your copy of the DSM-5 and let's get into the episode. First of all, I'm going to give you a really quick 1, maybe 2 minute brief summary of the background. Most of you will know this anyway, but just for those who need to be filled in, I don't know, maybe you've just woken up from a coma, in which case, welcome back. So right now, there's a defamation lawsuit between Johnny Depp, age 58, and his ex-wife, Amber Heard, age 36, both actors and actresses. This began on April the 12th in Fairfax in Virginia. So originally Depp filed for a $50 million defamation suit against Heard in 2019 because she wrote an op-ed piece about domestic abuse and basically strongly insinuated that she was a victim of domestic abuse. And then Johnny Depp said that this article irreparably damaged his career, including him being dropped from the Disney role of Pirates of the Caribbean franchise just days afterwards. So why is Amber Heard now suing Johnny Depp? Heard's lawyers tried to get Depp's defamation lawsuit dismissed after he lost the UK case, but a judge refused this, citing differences in the UK and US defamation laws, and also pointing out that Heard was not a defendant in the case against the Sun. So Johnny Depp initially was suing the Sun. And then Heard filed a $100 million countersuit against Depp, claiming that he defamed her when his legal team referred to her claims as, and I quote, fake and a sexual violence hoax. So very briefly, the Sun lawsuit was a 16-day trial in the UK in the summer of 2020, and Depp sued the Sun's publishers over a headline where they called him a wife beater. And Heard actually testified in that trial. She made 14 different allegations of abuse against Depp. Depp denied all of them, but a judge ruled that 12 of those were proved to the civil standard, and therefore the Sun's headline was substantially true. So why am I mentioning the Sun lawsuit? What's the significance of all of this? Well, to me, this suggests that a judge, like a professional, heard all the evidence and believed it's true. Now, when I say it, I mean those allegations of abuse. I should point out that it's true to the civil standard, not to the criminal standard. So the civil standard is on the balance of probabilities, i.e. more likely than not, i.e. 51% chance or more, versus the criminal standard. So because criminal standards involve people getting prison sentences, the standard is higher and it has to be beyond reasonable doubt, i.e. in the eyes of the laws, 99% sure. So by the judge accepting this, he's saying that it's more than 51, but not necessarily up to 99. So did Johnny Depp commit abuse? Nobody really knows the answer to that. I'm sure there are many supporters of Johnny Depp. Some of you, dear viewers watching this, probably think that. But ultimately, we don't know the truth. But we can say that a judge found it to the civil standard. Okay, now I'm going to give you a brief summary of the specific allegations and the testimony so far before I get into my own analysis of the expert witnesses. So as you probably know, both Heard and Depp have accused each other of physical violence. Both have denied the other person's claim. And in his testimony, Depp said, and I quote, never did
I myself reached the point of striking Miss Heard in any way, nor have I ever struck a woman in my life. He claimed that Heard was actually violent towards him, detailing one instance in which his finger was seriously injured after Heard allegedly threw a vodka bottle at him. So the many witnesses in this trial, as you might have heard, the first witness was Christy Dembrowski, who's Depp's older sister and personal manager, and she spoke of the abuse they faced as children. And as you might know, Johnny Depp went into a lot of detail about how abusive and horrible his mother was towards all the siblings, but particularly him. I've actually done a separate video on Johnny Depp talking about his childhood abuse. I'll put the links in the description. What I basically said in that video is that it's not particularly relevant, in my opinion, because it might put Johnny Depp's kind of upbringing and his traumas into context, and it might be interesting, for the general public, for us, but it doesn't really help us decide whether the abuse occurred or not, and that is the crux of the crux of the defamation trials. So in terms of the rest of the evidence for this case, as you probably know, there's a lot of conflicting evidence. I can't go through it all because there's just so much and nobody really knows the truth. So to give you a couple of quick examples, 𝐜𝐨𝐯𝐞𝐫𝐬, who is Depp's childhood friend, and he said that Depp allowed him to live rent-free in an LA penthouse so he could focus on his art. He said even though Depp and Heard lived nearby, he never witnessed any violence between the two. And he claimed that Amber Heard's claim was a malicious lie. Thing is though, we have to question, is that reliable testimony? I mean, obviously he's biased. He's friends with Johnny Depp. Johnny Depp has let him stay in his apartment. And also the other thing is, just because that person didn't see it doesn't mean it didn't occur, because as we know, abuse can and usually does occur behind closed door rather than in public. Depp's legal team also called a doctor and a nurse who treated him for substance abuse, and they also claimed that they'd witnessed arguments between the couple but no physical abuse. But again, you have to question, is that reliable? Like, that doesn't mean that abuse didn't occur, it just means that nobody witnessed it. And then to counter that, Depp's security guard, Travis McGivern, said that he witnessed verbal vitriol and physical violence between the two actors, including an instance in which he claimed Heard threw a Red Bull can at Depp. So there is different people saying different things. Heard herself had her own horror stories involving a liquor bottle and sexual assault, and Dawn Hughes, who's the expert witness for Amber Heard, said that she learnt of an incident where Depp grabbed a bottle and, I quote, shoved it up her, and apparently Heard's thought process at the time was, I hope it's not the broken one. Yeesh. If that is true, then that's fairly disturbing, isn't it? I mean, there's no two ways around that. That's very severe, malicious, horrific violence, if it's true. Okay, right, that was all the background of the case. Now let's get into the juicy stuff. I'm going to talk you through the expert witness evidence. I'm going to give you my inside opinion, and I will hopefully try and get you thinking like an expert witness and a forensic psychiatrist. That's my ultimate goal. Also, to a lesser degree, to take over the world. So, a clinical and forensic psychologist named Shannon Curry was hired by Depp's legal team to conduct a psychological evaluation of Amber Heard last year, and she gave her a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder and histrionic personality disorder. I've done a longer video about what those diagnoses mean and how they might be relevant to Amber Heard's alleged behaviour. I won't go into all of that now, but very briefly, borderline personality disorder, also known as emotionally unstable personality disorder, more common in women than men. It's associated with a lack of being able to contain emotions, explosive kind of arguments, explosive relationships, turbulent relationships, irritability, unstable affect, which means that you're not ever really properly happy, a loss of identity, a fear of abandonment, self-harming. And the fear of abandonment is possibly the most relevant part here, because according to this witness statement, Amber Heard made desperate attempts to prevent Johnny Depp from leaving, because that's part of the condition. And then on top of that, she added somebody with histrionic personality disorders have to be the centre of attention, and they're quite sensitive to criticism. So again, that's a possible kind of mechanism for Amber Heard's alleged behaviour. Despite everything I've just said, I have to ask the question, is that really relevant? And in my opinion, the answer is no, because the issue about the defamation lawsuit is whether or not Amber Heard committed abuse. It's not whether she had an underlying personality disorder. The personality disorder is just a description of behaviors. It doesn't tell you whether she did that. So the diagnosis of diagnosing somebody with a personality disorder in this kind of trial, in my professional view, is actually pointless. The exception would be if it was a civil trial that is suggesting that Amber Heard developed a personality disorder because of the abuse that she faced from Johnny Depp. So what I'm saying is, if somebody's saying that they got psychiatric injury because of something else somebody did, then it's relevant because that is a consequence of their behavior. So to put that into perspective, I do cases that are called condition and prognosis cases for a whole range of traumas, road traffic accidents, sexual abuse, and it's only relevant if I make a diagnosis that's caused by psychiatric injury, like post-traumatic stress disorder, which Amber Heard was diagnosed with by another expert. We'll come on to that. The other context where it could be relevant, a diagnosis, psychiatric diagnosis, is in a criminal trial if you're saying that somebody's not criminally culpable because they, for example, had schizophrenia, were hearing voices, get a psychiatric defense, not guilty by reason of insanity, blah, blah, blah. Entirely different context topic to what's happening here. So what I'm trying to say, and I think I'm rambling a bit, is that whether Amber Heard or not has a personality disorder or not is actually irrelevant, because it's not about that. It's about whether she committed the abuse or not. Personality disorder is just a pattern of somebody behaving like that. I'm going to give you an analogy to put this into to try and explain it. If somebody is being charged with drink driving, say they killed somebody, the ultimate question is, did they commit that act? Were they drunk? Did they run over that person? If you diagnose them as an alcoholic, you're saying they have a pattern of drinking and that it's more likely that somebody with that disorder would drink drive, but that is irrelevant to whether that actual person did or did not do that particular crime. So what I'm saying is, at a stretch, you could say that if Amber Heard had borderline personality disorder, then that would make her more likely to have these explosive arguments and to force Johnny Depp to stay in the relationship because she's got a fear of abandonment. But that doesn't mean that she did those things. So something being more likely is not the same as somebody doing something. I hope that all made sense. Okay, moving on. Another interesting point is that in the cross-examination, Heard's lawyer questioned why Shannon Curry, had dinner and drinks at Johnny Depp's house with the actor's legal team before she was hired. And also they mentioned that she was paid $500 per hour. Nice work if you can get it. Okay, so here's my opinion on that. It's not illegal, but it is pretty dodgy, in my opinion, and I'll explain why. Contrary to what many people know or believe, the role of an expert witness in any kind of court case, civil, criminal, they have to be objective. Their role solely is to help advise the judge and the courts to make a decision, to help give knowledge in areas where they're the expert and the court is not the expert. So they have to be honest, they have to be objective, and they have to be neutral. I think that's really, really important. It's kind of the crux of all of this evidence. And I think it gets lost. I don't think people understand that. So I've read all these articles about the expert witness evidence. I've seen all these YouTube videos, and I've not seen it once mentioned the fact that the expert witnesses are supposed to be impartial. So what I'm saying is even if they're instructed by and paid by one particular side, they are not supposed to have a finding that helps that side. They're supposed to only have a completely objective and neutral finding to assist the court, not to assist Johnny Depp or his legal team, not to assist Amber Heard. So putting that into another analogy would be like if the judge was having dinner at Johnny Depp's house, right? You would find that dodgy. If the judge who had to decide who the defamation case was going to be, or even, let's take another context outside of this. If you were in trial, say your family member was murdered, and there was a murder trial going on, and the judge who is overseeing that trial was having dinner at the house of the person that's accused, then that wouldn't be objective, would it? Now, I'm being a bit facetious, and I've intentionally picked an extreme example, but I hope you can get the concept of what I'm talking about. It's not impartial. So, as I keep saying, I'm an expert witness, and I have had solicitors' firms ask me or contact me ahead of a case to ask about my experience. So they're basically trying to find out if I have experience, like have I diagnosed PTSD, have I seen people have I assessed people previously who've been victims of sexual violence, road traffic accidents, clinical negligence, botched surgery, blah, blah, blah. But they're only trying to find out whether I'm a suitable expert. And you can do that over the phone. I don't think I've ever actually been asked to meet a lawyer in person. You do it over the phone, I get asked to send my CV. I'm never asked my opinion, what my opinion's going to be, because I'm supposed to be objective and neutral. I shouldn't be telling people my opinion in advance. So what I'm trying to say is I'm suggesting that the very fact that she met with her team, had dinner and drinks, suggests to me that she wasn't impartial. Obviously, I've got no proof because I don't know exactly what was said at that dinner. Nobody does. Well, obviously the people that were at the dinner does, but let's just say it seems dodgy to me. It seems dodgy. It's not legal, but it's very dodgy to me. Okay, so Shannon Curry testified and found it likely that Amber Heard feigned symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. And however, Amber Heard's team's forensic psychologist, who's called Dawn Hughes, said that she had no personality disorder and she did have PTSD. So this strongly suggests to me that they're cowboy experts. What do I mean by cowboy experts? That is when somebody bends the truth, an expert bends the truth to find a finding to whoever's instructing them, whoever's paying them. Now, I can't say this definitively because I wasn't there during the assessments, but you have to admit it's a bit convenient, isn't it? The person who's working for Johnny Depp says she's got personality disorder, no PTSD, basically trying to say that it's her fault. And the person working for Amber Heard says no personality disorder, but does have PTSD, basically saying it's not her fault, but she's got some psychiatric damage. Okay, next interesting question. Can you fake PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder? So very briefly, it occurs, it's like a reaction to extreme trauma, life-threatening trauma, which is vital. I'll come on to that. And the general kind of symptoms or clusters of symptoms are reliving the trauma, flashbacks, nightmares, emotional numbness, and avoidance behavior. So avoidance behavior is when you literally avoid things that can trigger memories of the initial trauma. And as I said before, you have to have life-threatening trauma. And did that happen? Well, it's hard to say because, as I said before, there's very mixed evidence in this trial. So if it was just low-level arguments or even low-level violence, that is not compatible with a diagnosis of PTSD. However, if there was regular, serious sexual assault, the thing that I mentioned before about, Amber Heard alleges with bottles, etc., then yeah, absolutely PTSD is feasible. So I just want to be crystal clear. I'm not suggesting that somebody who's been a victim of domestic violence or had a lower level of violence didn't find it traumatic or wasn't distressed. That's absolutely feasible, absolutely possible. They might have mental health issues, might have depression, might have intrusive memories. But what I'm saying is by definition, they can't have PTSD. That's not my moral judgment. That's literally the definition of the disorder. You'll find it in ICD-10, DSM-5, or basically all the psychiatric diagnostic manuals. In fact, Hughes even picked up on this. She said, in order to meet the criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder, you have to have an actual case. It's one of the few diagnostic entities that we have to have a cause for. And the cause was intimate partner violence by Mr. Depp. Now, I'm going to come back onto this, but this is absolutely not allowed for an expert witness because she is saying that the intimate partner violence did occur. And that is a factual matter for the court. It's not an opinion for a psychologist to give. So she's allowed to say if the court accepts that there was interpersonal violence, domestic violence from Depp, then Amber Heard has symptoms that are consistent with PTSD, but she's not allowed to say that violence did occur. So can you see the difference? It sounds like kind of a bit nitpicky and subtle, but it's an absolute vital part of being an expert witness. Basically, she's not allowed to comment on whether there was domestic violence in the same way that an expert witness during a criminal trial is not allowed to comment if they think that somebody is guilty or innocent. Now, to put a little twist on everything that I'm saying, you can actually have an expert that comes in to see whether somebody has suffered from physical abuse. So in some of the cases that I do, immigration cases where the clients have been tortured, we've had an expert general practitioner who comes in, not a psychiatrist, and these two are both psychologists, but an actual physical doctor expert who's examined scars, etc., to say whether they think on balance somebody's been a victim of torture. But that is not what's happening in this case. This is where a psychologist who is not an expert in diagnosing physical health issues is making a factual claim saying that
Amber Heard was a victim of violence from Johnny Depp, and that is a complete no-no. It is against the ethical code of an expert witness. Actually happened the other way around with the other expert, but I'll come on to that as well. Okay, let's move on to another bit. Did the experts use scientific and rigorous methods to reach their conclusions? Both experts were asked this. Both experts, unsurprisingly, said yes, they did. Curry testified that she relied in part on a test she administered called the MMPI-2, which stands for the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory 2, which is a set of 567 questions that are used and are self-reported. However, I think it's really important to remember that these are designed to be used in a clinical context, not a legal context, not a legal diagnosis. So what I'm saying is that this personality scale, the MMPI, is not a valid measure of a person's psychopathology or their behaviour if that person is not doing the test in a way that's honest or frank. Similarly, for the PTSD diagnosis, the clinicians used a CAPS-5, which is the clinician administered PTSD scale, version 5, and Heard allegedly scored 19 out of 20 possible symptoms of trauma, and the expert Shannon Curry said even the most disabling forms of PTSD do not score that high. So she's suggesting that Amber Heard is faking, exaggerating PTSD, even though Dawn Hughes diagnosed her with this. This is my comment on all of that. Both experts used self-reported psychological questionnaires. So that means they ask the patient questions and they come up with the diagnosis depending on those answers, as opposed to like an observational one or something that's a bit more objective where the clinician makes the decisions rather than the patients. So what I'm saying is that neither are a valid measure if the patient is either lying or if the patient has been coached to say something. As I said before, they're used in the context of clinical diagnosis. They shouldn't be used. Or well, actually, that's a bit too strong. I wouldn't say they shouldn't be used, but they shouldn't be relied upon in legal context. They can be used as a backup to a clinical diagnosis, but they're not diagnostic. So why is that? Well, to put it bluntly, if you've generally got something like PTSD and you've been suffering for symptoms for years and you need treatment, then you're going to be a reliable reporter when it comes to talking about those symptoms. But if you're just if it helps your court case to have that diagnosis, then I don't think it can be reliable. Again, I can't say for definite whether Amber Heard or whether either of the expert witnesses are bending the truth. I can't say that for definite. I'm just saying that in this context, it could be impartial and non-objective. So the next good question is, can you fake PTSD? And I think that the answer of that is yes, and especially if the assessor is looking for particular symptoms or if they want to make a specific diagnosis. So I'll give you an example. One of the core symptoms of PTSD, as I mentioned before, is, who's paying attention? Flashbacks. So flashbacks are they're not intrusive memories, that's a different thing. Flashbacks is actually being transported back in time and reliving the original trauma, not just through memories, but visual images, smells, sounds. So what I'm saying is, so I do this kind of assessment. Say if somebody's had a road traffic accident and they're suing the insurance company because they thought they were going to die and they claim they have PTSD. That's exactly the kind of thing as I would assess during my civil cases, separate to the criminal cases I do. And I would test the veracity of the symptoms by asking the patient to describe the flashbacks in detail. And if they have those features that I mentioned before, then they're true flashbacks. However, if you were trying to bend the truth, if you were a nefarious psychiatrist or psychologist, and I've worked with many, then they might just say, do you have flashbacks? So if you say, do you have flashbacks? Anybody can say yes. But if you actually get them to describe them, then you'll filter out a lot of non-genuine flashbacks. Does that make sense? So what I'm saying is, all of these tests can be unreliable if the person using them wants them to be unreliable. Okay, so another thing I wanted to say is the crux of the matter of whether Amber Heard has PTSD is about whether the physical abuse from Johnny Depp occurred. That is actually more important, in my opinion, than any clinical symptoms. Because if that level of life-threatening abuse didn't occur, then it's not compatible with that diagnosis. And I think all these personality inventories and tests and scores and blah, 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 it's all BS. It's all a red herring.
So I'll give you an analogy. Instead of using the diagnosis of PTSD, let's use the diagnosis of a broken ankle. Say we're trying to figure out in court, does somebody have a broken ankle? And you're asking questions like, are they in a cast? Are they limping? Well, anyone can just put on a cast. There could be lots of reasons for somebody limping. They could have gout, they could have a sprain, they could be faking it. All of that is actually irrelevant. What is relevant is the test to see whether the ankle is fractured. And you do an x-ray, you literally see if there's a physical break. Obviously, there's not an investigation as simple to find out domestic abuse, but the analogy I'm trying to make is that everything else is irrelevant. It's about whether the abuse occurred or not. That's what the judge has to decide. That's more important than any one expert witness saying whether somebody's got a diagnosis or not. And I'm saying that myself as an expert witness, so hopefully you believe that I'm being honest. Okay, another thing I wanted to mention, a massive area in this trial that has not been commented upon is the medical notes. That is a huge part of anybody's presentation in this kind of civil court case, arguably even more important than the clinical presentation. To put it bluntly, if somebody had something like severe post-traumatic stress disorder, they would, not 100% definitely, but very likely would present to mental health services, to a psychiatrist. So when I assess, let's use the same analogy, when I assess somebody to see post road traffic accident, I look through their medical notes. And if I wasn't to do that, then I would be criticised by a judge. The evidence would be incomplete. Whereas in what I've read, this is not mentioned at all by either of the expert witnesses in Amber Heard's trial, which suggests to me that she didn't present to a psychiatrist, which makes me question how can she have such a severe PTSD, but she hasn't actually done anything about it. I mean, it's possible that she didn't have the symptoms. She did have the symptoms, didn't seek for help, but I don't know. It just makes me question the whole thing. Okay, we're almost finished now. My final point is that I mentioned this briefly before. Both experts seem to claim that their clients were the victims of domestic abuse. What do I think about this? Before I answer that, I just want to very quickly introduce you to my channel, A Psych for Sore Minds. My name is Dr. Shaham Das. I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist. I assess people in courts and in prisons and in secure psychiatric units, mostly mentally disordered offenders. This channel, A Psych for Sore Minds, is a smorgasbord of videos related to true crime with a twist of psychiatry. My videos are like my children. I definitely have my favorites. If you're interested, go and check out my deep dive. So it's a lot more sort of psychoanalysis of true crime related to Joseph McCann, who went on one of the most diabolical crime sprees. And I think it was like 11 victims of sexual abuse in the space of a few days. I will put the link in the video below, or you can search for it on my channel. Okay, back to the case. As I said before, both experts seem to suggest that their clients were the victims of domestic abuse. And I've already touched on this, but that's completely outside the role of a psychological expert because it's a factual matter for the court to decide. And I don't know who's telling the truth, or perhaps there's a little bit of truth. Maybe there was abuse from both sides. But again, the reason I think this is interesting because it suggests to me that neither of them are being completely neutral. So I suppose the whole point of my video that I'm rambling on about a bit is that I'm surprised at the quality of the expert witness evidence. I think it's poor. I think the quality is poor, regardless of the clinical diagnosis. Just the lack of objectivity and neutrality, I think, is shockingly poor. And I'm surprised the judges haven't pulled them up on it before this. Okay, we're about to finish. Let's keep it moving. I ain't got time for shucking and jiving. To conclude and to summarise, I'm particularly interested in the aspect of Amber Heard, Johnny Depp defamation trial that involves expert witnesses, because I'm one myself. There's been a lot of news coverage, a lot of things talked about, a lot of red herrings that I appreciate that the public are interested in. Maybe they don't understand the role of an expert witness, but a lot of it is actually, interesting, but it's not relevant to the case. Take-home messages, what I want you to remember is that like judges, expert witnesses, in this case both forensic psychologists, are supposed to be independent and only give honest and objective opinion for the court, only for the court, not for the particular team who instructs them. Shannon Curry had dinner and drinks at Depp's house with the actor's legal team. As I said before, seems dodgy to me because they're not really supposed to coach or kind of discuss her opinions. Can't say for definite because I don't know what was said at that dinner, but it's not a good look for me. Shannon Curry diagnosed Amber Heard with borderline personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder.
Firstly, as I said in my original video, these diagnoses possibly a bit dodgy because they're made not for clinical treatment, but in the context of a trial. Therefore, are they really objective? And secondly, possibly more importantly, I don't think the diagnoses are actually that relevant because only her behaviour is relevant. The diagnoses just suggest somebody with a pattern of this behaviour. Dawn Hughes diagnosed Amber Heard with post-traumatic stress disorder. As I said before, this can be faked if the subject is coached or if the assessor is looking for particular symptoms or looking to make a diagnosis. I'm not saying it was definitely faked, I'm just saying it can be easily done, so we need to take all of it with a pinch of salt, basically. And finally, both expert witnesses use self-reported psychological questionnaires, which, as I keep saying, is used in the context of a clinical diagnosis, not for legal issues. Both experts seem to suggest their clients are the victim of domestic abuse. They both can't be right, I don't think. And those are all my criticisms. That's quite a lot. I hope you found this educational. I hope it's given you a bit of an insight, a bit of a perspective from an expert witness such as myself. Stay euthymic, buy my goddamn book, watch my videos, see me at CrimeCon in June, and whatever happens, do not forget. I love you.